In the dense jungle of Bukavu, Africa, a plane crashes. Fortunately, everyone survives, but a baby named George is lost, and they are unable to find him. 25 years later, George has become the king of the jungle, swinging through the trees like a mighty Tarzan. However, he still hasn't figured out how to land safely on the next tree and always hits into them hard. In the meantime, a young woman named Ursula arrives in Bukavu to document her travels. She is accompanied by a local tour guide named Kwame and 3 others to join her in the jungle. To her surprise, her fiancé, Lyle, hires 2 trackers, Max and Thor, to find her, as he feels it's unsafe for Ursula to stay in the jungle. Later that night, Lyle arranges their flight home, but Ursula decides to stay a few extra days and expresses her desire to climb the mountains and observe the big apes. Meanwhile, Max mentions that there's something even more fascinating than the apes, known as the white ape. Ursula, intrigued by this, asks Kwame to provide more details about the white ape. Kwame explains that the white ape is a legendary primate. He rules the jungle and possesses the strength of a lion. As Ursula's curiosity grows and she becomes eager to learn more about this mysterious figure, Lyle begins to mock Kwame's story, and the locals mock Lyle in return. The next day, the group is led to the mountains by Kwame, where a big head of an ape is carved. They are about to cross a hanging bridge when Lyle shakes the bridge in an attempt to frighten Ursula and discontinue their journey. But one of the guides slips and falls off the bridge. Fortunately, the local survives but suffers injuries. Lyle criticizes the guide's lack of experience, irritating the guides who repeat every word he says in their language. Lyle notices the locals are planning something bad to him and offers them cigars and his camera in an attempt to make peace, believing it to be the first time the locals have had access to such things. However, it turns out that the locals are even better at using the camera than he is, and they begin to make fun of him, prompting him to leave and take Ursula with him to the jungle to find the white ape so that they can quickly return home. Ursula tries to warn him that they shouldn't go into the jungle alone, as they might get lost. But Lyle dismisses her concerns and is determined that they can manage when all of a sudden they are approached by a lion. Both of them get frightened, and Lyle immediately starts running, leaving Ursula alone, but trips over a root and gets knocked out. As the lion approaches Ursula, George enters with his famous jungle roar ahead of his, swinging towards the lion and saves Ursula. But he accidentally knocks her unconscious on a tree branch, the same time Lyle awakens and sees George describing him as White Ape carrying Ursula. George takes Ursula to his treehouse, while Lyle tears off his clothes and smears cherry juice all over them and his face to create fake blood, and invents a false story about being attacked by the White Ape. The next morning, Ursula wakes up to the sounds of various animals living around George's treehouse and meets a talking ape named Ape Primate, who offers her breakfast. Just as Ursula becomes frightened and begins screaming, George arrives carrying bananas. After confirming she is not hallucinating, Ursula loses consciousness again. George gently tends to her and is startled by how her body differs from his, as he had assumed Ursula was just an unusual-looking man. Having spent his entire life in the forest, Ursula is the first human he has ever encountered. Noticing George's confusion, Ape explains that she is the female version of his species. Meanwhile, the rest of the group enters the forest to search for Ursula, while Lyle tries to convince them that 2 lions and a white ape attacked him, which is why he was unable to help her. Unconvinced by his story, the locals mock him, pointing out that there is only 1 lion in the jungle. At the same time, Ursula regains consciousness and goes down to thank George for saving her from the lion. She then asks George for help in finding the rest of her team and Lyle. He promises to help her and introduces her to his dog. However, the dog turns out to be an elephant named Shep, who behaves like a dog. After Shep welcomes Ursula in a very shaky manner, they start searching for her team, riding on Shep's back for faster travel. The trio stops to rest for a while. George introduces Ursula to a bird named Tookie, who informs him that the little monkeys are in trouble and that he needs to check on them. Just as Ursula begins to admire George's connection with the animals in the forest, the lion arrives. The monkey shows courage by standing its ground and imitating George, which prompts the lion to leave. However, this is all an act, as George and the lion are actually friends. Tired from searching all day, they return to the treehouse. George teaches Ursula how to swing from the vine, but she becomes scared. So George shows off his skills with his friends standing by for an emergency, just in case he hits the tree, which happens all the time. And indeed, it does. Ursula falls asleep afterward, and George realizes he is beginning to like her. He asks Ape how to express his feelings to her. However, Ape doesn't know how humans court in their way, so he teaches him the ape's way. Afterward, as George and Ursula are relaxing next to a waterfall, George begins courting her in the ape's way, but Ursula finds it strange for obvious reasons and leaves. Later that night, she offers him her ring in appreciation for saving her life, and as the animals play their music, George asks her to dance in return. But Ursula declines, saying she doesn't know how to dance and is worried that people may judge her. George reassures her that no one will judge her there, and that as long as she enjoys the moment, she shouldn't care about what others might say. Ursula agrees to dance with him the ape's way, and they both joyfully dance together. The next morning, the locals becomes tired of searching for Ursula and asks for a higher payment. With no other option, Lyle agrees, but he wants them to search faster and decides to lead the way. But he trips on a root again and lands in elephant poo, and, as usual, he can't stop the locals from laughing at him. While they continue laughing at Lyle, he hears Ursula laughing in the distance and starts investigating. They then see George and realizes that he is the white ape they are talking about. It is also revealed that Max and Thor are there to capture the white ape. Lyle pulls his gun and rushes over, finding Ursula and starting to kiss her. However, she rejects him, reminding him of how he abandoned her with the lion and screams for George's help. At the same time, Max and Thor see Shep and prepare to shoot him, but Ape tries to defend Shep, and George, seeing Lyle with a gun, runs toward him. George gets shot but survives, and Ursula takes him to a plane for medical treatment. While Max and Thor are released from prison, Lyle is locked up in jail after the locals identify him as the shooter and continue to make fun of him. In the meantime, after discovering Ape can speak, Max and Thor are devising a plan to capture Ape, to turn him into a show attraction. Meanwhile, Ursula and George arrive in San Francisco, revealing she is very wealthy. But since it's George's first time in the city, he is amazed by everything he sees around him and starts acting foolishly, though he doesn't care. They arrive at Ursula's house, and George treats the balcony of her home like his treehouse and insists on sleeping there for the night. The next morning, Ursula's best friend Betsy arrives and is immediately attracted by George's attractive physique. When George puts on Ursula's dress, Betsy suggests she get him some proper clothes. So they go shopping with George still wearing the dress. Once she buys him a suit, he and Ursula take a walk down the street where Ursula's mother Beatrice sees them. She immediately calls on the phone, but George picks up the phone and answers with his famous roar, shocking her. Ursula advises George to stay at home while she heads to work. She then takes Betsy to visit her father Arthur to talk about Lyle, but is shocked to find him hosting a celebration party for her and Lyle's return. Meanwhile, George receives advice from the TV he's watching to go out and explore the city, so he does, disregarding Ursula's advice to stay. He participates in various activities until he finds the Golden Gate Bridge and starts climbing it. After reaching the top, he spots a parasailer tangled in one of the cables and decides to help. But the rescue is now being broadcast live, and Ursula sees it. George eventually rescues the man, but gets tangled in the parasail, and the winds carry him away. Ursula panics, rushes to the bridge, and hires a boat to rescue George. George lands on the boat, but as usual fails to do so gracefully. Meanwhile, back in the jungle, Max and Thor successfully tranquilize Ape. But before Ape loses consciousness, he instructs Tookie to find George. The duo then puts Ape in a cage, while Tookie sets out to find George. At the same time, George and Ursula are on their way to her engagement party, where Ursula's parents are waiting. After arriving, Ursula immediately tells them everything that happened in the jungle, and reveals that she is no longer interested in marrying Lyle. Although Arthur is not opposed to his daughter's decision, Beatrice does not want Ursula to cancel the party, and asks to meet George. As Ursula looks for George to introduce him to her parents, he swings in the vine and destroys the engagement cake. The party eventually starts, and George is belittled by some of the guests, but he quickly puts them in their place. To get away from them, George goes to the ranch, plays with the horses, and is admired by all the female guests, including Ursula. But later that evening, Beatrice takes George outside and demands that he stay away from Ursula because they are not suited for each other. After the party ends, George is reflecting on what Beatrice told him when Tookie finds him and informs him that Ape has been kidnapped. George immediately decides to rescue the ape and bids goodbye to Ursula, who's already asleep. The next morning, Ursula becomes worried that George left without saying anything and discusses it with her parents. She realizes that Beatrice might have said something to George to make him leave. Beatrice admits that she told George to leave Ursula if he truly loved her, and this makes Ursula realizes that she is also in love with George and insists on going after him to the jungle. Arthur lets her go, believing she is old enough to know what will make her happy, but Beatrice remains opposed to her daughter's decision. Meanwhile, George arrives in Africa in a box with Tookie and puts on his new shoes to start running toward the jungle. On the other hand, Max and Thor are lost in the jungle and have been circling it for days. They decide to take another route, which leads back to the treehouse according to Ape, but they do not listen to him. After hours of running, George arrives at the treehouse, just as Max and Thor also arrive and start arguing. George immediately fights the duo and Ape helps. Shep, Tookie, and the monkey also join in. Ursula also arrives, swinging in like George and landing just as he does. Just as they are about to express their love for each other, they are suddenly interrupted by Lyle. It turns out Lyle had escaped from prison, joined a cult, and even became ordained as a minister. He forces Ursula to come with him and get married, but as George tries to stop him, he is caught by the mercenaries Lyle brought to restrain him. Lyle then takes Ursula to the nearby Ape River, where he is preparing to escape in a boat. Before the mercenaries take George, Monkey assembles the apes of the jungle and rescues George and Ape, and then imprisoned the mercenaries along with Max and Thor. George rushes to rescue Ursula, who is in the boat with Lyle and unknowingly headed toward the dangerous rapids. George makes the farthest swing of his life, but still crashes into a tree that falls across the river, allowing him to rescue Ursula. Meanwhile, Lyle is carried by the water into a dark cave, where an ape joins him. Finally, George and Ursula confess their love for each other, and they happily marry with the approval of Ursula's parents, and in the company of their friends and animal friends. Sometime later, George introduces his son, George Jr., to everyone in the jungle, while Ape has become a star in Las Vegas. See you in our next Film Flash. Thank you for watching.